to the research project final report presentation for highway litter surveillance studies. My name is Vincent Neal, the project manager of the project. Nathan Lee is the champion, and Bob Chamberlain is the principal investigator. We are recording this presentation, and we will post the recorded video into our research website. Before I turn the time to Bob, I would like to thank the tech members, our champion, and our researchers for their support and make this project a quick turnaround. And if you want to receive a CE credit for attending this presentation, send me a text in the chat box or send me an email. So with that, I'm going to turn the time to Bob. Go ahead, Bob.
Thank you, Vincent. And hi, everyone. Bob Chamberlain here. I'm a consultant and I work with UDOT's Research and Innovation Division. And one never knows the turns their career might take. So here I am in highway litter. And it's actually been a very interesting project and obviously an important one to UDOT. I wanted just to introduce the team beyond myself. First, Steve Stein, who is with ER Planning out of Gaithersburg, Maryland. When I first was asked to look into this issue, I did the normal thing, which was search around to see what other DOTs had done in highway litter. And Steve's name came up again and again. He's done a number of highway litter studies for DOTs around the country, as well as for the Keep America Beautiful campaign. So he's developed some techniques and I think really kind of advanced our ability to do this research quickly. So thanks, Steve, for your effort on this. And also my colleague, Troy Lincoln, who did the lion's share of the field investigation. He was quite meticulous with great attention to detail and good energy. So I think it ended up being a very good team. So in final presentation mode, I'm going to move into a slide deck that will cover what we did in this project and our main findings. So with your help, I'll be able to share my screen. Maybe someone can give me a thumbs up that you can see the slide deck.
Not yet.
Not yet. How's it look?
There we go.
All right, great. Thank you. All righty, thank you. So here we go. I'm just going to get into this final presentation. What I'm going to cover is shown here. First, review the objective of the study. What steps did we take to do it? An important step was reaching out to the 4 UDOT regions, and we have some takeaways from that outreach that I want to share with you. And then we'll get into the findings and from the field surveillance and key conclusions. The photos here are relevant. You can see Troy out there. That was our first day out on SR 201. And it gives you an idea of what we do. We stake out an area and do a thorough recording of all of the litter that is found in that area. And then later with that data, we make extrapolations for what the litter looks like over a broader area. And that was done for 9 sites throughout the state across all 4 regions. And the photo of the $20 bill has gotten a lot of play. that was my find. And so it shows you a study like this can be highly remunerative. Yeah. Okay. The study objective. First, systematically study identified litter hotspot areas in Utah by capturing, recording, and logging litter generation sources and major contributors to litter problems. So this was really focused on trying to figure out where the litter comes from in terms of the agent being the source. And we have estimates of that, and we'll be discussing that in this presentation. This shows some of the mapping that we've done. I have a few more maps to show, but it just gives you an idea of the detailed litter survey area, in this case along SR 201 in Region 2, and also where it sits in kind of a regional context. In an early meeting on this project, Nathan asked that we show the transfer facilities and landfill facilities that were proximate to the sites that were surveyed. And those are shown on this map and on the other ones as well. And that's a little bit of a foreshadowing. One of the key conclusions in the project is that a lot of trash does come from trash compacting vehicles and recycling vehicles. So I think that's an important finding in terms of now thinking of the next step about how to actually reduce highway litter. Okay. The steps taken, this is actually fairly straightforward. We did the region interviews, we did site mapping. Troy and I, but primarily Troy, went out and did the field data collection. There's data analysis, and then of course meetings, reports, and presentations. The final report has been posted. It's shown here, and the link to that report is shown in this slide deck as well. There is a lot of information in the report, much more detail than I'll give in the presentation. So I think it's a wealth of information, quite a bit of detail that gives you some idea of the differences from region to region, and also just of the overall, the magnitude of the problem. Just a little bit about sources. When we started looking into this, and when I first talked with Steve Stein, it became clear that when people do these types of studies, there are kind of the usual suspects, the common sources of highway litter, and they're listed here. Trash recycling vehicles being really in Utah the #1 source of highway litter, but followed closely by motorists, construction debris, unsecured vehicles, vehicle debris, and also pedestrians. One thing I'll point out is that I think as we've all driven highways everywhere, but including in Utah, there are elements of highway litter that are quite hazardous. Tire treads and coolers and mattresses that fall off vehicles. And those items get removed as quickly as they are found because they present a hazard to travel. And so those items were not necessarily in our survey of roadside litter, though we did get good photo coverage of vehicles in the lower left corner of this slide. It shows a vehicle that's filled with, it's a UDOT vehicle filled with these larger pieces of litter that are almost entirely from unsecured vehicles, and they are big enough to really present a travel hazard. So when we talk about common sources of highway litter, these are the 6 main categories that we enumerated under. I just mentioned this highway litter. These are then photos that Troy took from Region 2 and Region 3. These are the larger pieces that are not in our survey, but are important to know about. It ends up being a big volume. Of course, it's a big hazard. And all of it comes from unsecured loads, and not necessarily from trash and recycling vehicles, but from motorists or that are bringing things to a landfill or just moving things and have not secured it. So that's a an important point to make. Now, one thing I want to emphasize is that the estimates that we have about highway litter sources are just that. They're just estimates. We did not post video cameras out and look at hours of video to really try to pin it down accurately. Instead, using to a large extent the knowledge that Steve Stein has developed over doing scores of these studies, we use a technique of forensics, looking at the amount and the composition of the debris that's found, proximity to other known litter sources such as waste transfer facilities and landfills. A big and important part of this are the interviews that we had with UDOT field crews in each of the regions, their impressions of where the litter comes from. These people, of course, are tasked with cleaning up the litter and dealing with it, and often have some very clear ideas about where the litter comes from. And also the type of roadway factors in. And an important point there is that we did these surveys in what we're referring to as hotspots. So places where the region said, if you want to do a litter survey, go here, you'll see a lot of it. So these were not randomly selected, but just known litter hotspots. They also were predominantly on limited access facilities, interstates or other limited access facilities such as SR 201. And so for that reason, pedestrians as a source of litter never really came up very high on our list. Whereas if you were to do this along surface street arterials and lower functional class, you'd probably find a higher fraction of the litter coming from pedestrian sources. That's not the case in the survey that we did. Here are the 9 hotspots, again, across the 4 regions. Region 2 had 3 of the hotspots, 2 along SR 201, which does kind of win the prize as being the having the highest volume of trash among the 9 that were surveyed. And you can see the surveys took place over a month period in December, January, just a month ago. This is a map of the state of Utah. There's a lot of detail here, and it's a little bit hard to see, but the green triangles are the sites that we surveyed. And other information on here includes the mustard colored triangles are sites that were windshield surveyed in a 2013 highway litter study that UDOT commissioned. Also shown on here are the landfills and waste transfer stations in the state of Utah. And once again, that is a theme that came up again and again in our outreach to the regions, that a lot of the trash that ends up on the roadside is ultimately destined for one of these facilities, but doesn't quite make it there. So just a point that you'll see again in this presentation. The UDOT region outreach, we had a set of questions that we asked the people that we were put in touch with. The table shows you the people that we were in touch with in each region. We asked them for their ideas of litter hotspots and areas within each hotspot that would be representative and would help guide where our detailed survey would go. What their thoughts were for the sources or causes of the litter, whether there were nearby land uses that were contributing to the litter problem, the last time it was cleared, and how often UDOT does pick up the litter. This information we have and is in the final report. And I thought it would be add a little color to this to quote from some of these interviews that we had. And I'll just read these. I think they speak for themselves. Region 1, Wall Avenue is near a waste transfer facility. Trash flies from side load garbage trucks. Again, that was from Region 1, but we heard that across all 4 regions. The issue with SR 201, 90% of the litter trucks going to the dump take the exit at 5600 West. And that was a key source of highway litter for that hotspot. Also, within Region 2, we did a site on I-215, not far from UDOT Central Office. The sound walls on I-215 may be creating a wind effect that pulls trash out of vehicles. It's worse than it's ever been in my 23 years with the department. And then giving a fair voice to all regions. Region 3, trash seems to accumulate wherever barriers end. So there are, some physics at play here with regard to where the trash is heaviest that may have something to do with the wind effects of barriers and sound walls. And then Region 4 does have some uniqueness in that they say we can fill a dumpster every week with retreads, and particularly during the warmer, hotter months where retreads come apart and litter the highway. So they have that particular problem. And other things that we'll discuss in just a minute. I'm just going to show a few maps here. They're pretty self-explanatory, and isn't necessarily much to say about them, but we have a map like this for each of the 9 hotspots, similar to the one we saw earlier. It shows an inset of the precise location where the litter survey was conducted, and then a broader view so you can see where that site is relative to waste transfer facilities and landfills. And this is 21st Street in Region 1. This is one of I think the only place where it's not technically on a limited access facility. The other 8 of the 9 hotspots were on limited access facilities. This is Region 3, I-15 near exit 278. And you get an idea of where that is relative to the landfills nearby. And then the final one we're showing is in Region 4 on I-15, Post 11. And Region 4, I think, is different than the other regions in a highway litter sense, in that there's an awful lot of construction going on there. And so there is a special landfill in Washington County for construction debris. We also found in Region 4 a lot more discarded plastic bottles, beverage containers. That was really an outlier compared to the other 3 regions. Okay, so to some extent, this is the money slide. This is kind of answering the question, what are the key sources of highway litter in Utah? This is data that is taken across all the 9 hotspots. And of course, there's variation, but just to give you in one shot what things look like, the largest contributor from our estimates are trash and recycling vehicles, estimating 43% of the highway litter coming from these vehicles. Second place goes to motorists at 27%. And then, basically somewhat equal contributions from unsecured vehicles, vehicle debris, and construction debris haulers. So there are 5 big contributors, but the real big one is trash and recycling vehicles. Again, there are variations along the regions, but this is kind of the statewide snapshot. A little bit more data. Most of what I'm showing here is giving you kind of a statewide snapshot. The report, of course, has a lot of detail at each hotspot and then also by region. And this shows some of the differences by region. We do differentiate between large pieces of litter and small, and the cutoff is a 4-inch cutoff. So if it's larger than 4 inches, it shows up in the blue bar here. And you can just see this is in some ways a density measure, how many pieces of litter per 100 square feet. Say these tend to track fairly closely to population, but not exclusively. And one other thing to say about small litter is that, of course, things like bottle tops and cigarette butts, they would be included as small litter, but also in the unfortunate case where mowing might occur before an area is picked up, it will shred litter, larger pieces of litter into smaller litter. So that's a potential. I can't say that we saw that. Steve Stein, in doing this work around the country, has said that that is not uncommon to see that, but large litter can become small litter if that happens. So, okay. Another comparison across the regions. Again, just looking at the two main contributors or sources of highway litter being trash and recycling vehicles and motorists. This is just a stacked chart and shows you that, well above 50%, above 60% across all 4 regions. Those are the two main sources of highway litter. I guess I already showed this one. This is the density pieces per 100 square feet. Going backwards, that's why. Okay. Let's see. This is, I guess I wanted to throw this in there just to give you a sense of the categories of litter that we tallied things up with. And there's a lot of detail here, and you can kind of read across the y-axis to get an idea of how we would classify things when we were roadside with our clipboards. Probably the big takeaway is the largest columns are paper items and plastic debris. And there are subcategories of each of those, including a category for unidentifiable. And a lot of both the paper and the plastic debris kind of fell into that category, which does point to trash and recycling vehicles as being, or at least trash vehicles being one of the key sources. Okay, and another important finding, I was surprised to see this, but maybe as I got used to thinking about it more, not so surprised. But obviously, when we as a country started recycling our trash, the waste stream was reduced substantially. I think estimates I've seen, more than 50 to 60% of the waste stream was reduced once we started widespread recycling programs around the country. Now, that said, there's still an awful lot of the waste stream that is recyclable. And you can kind of see it here across the 9 hotspots that we surveyed, ranging between 22% to almost 50% of the waste stream being recyclable. So I think that's kind of an important finding from here, because, of course, this is something that could be reduced with more aggressive recycling programs. And I believe this will round it out, and we can move into questions. But kind of the key findings, repeating to some extent, across the 9 hotspots, the top sources are trash and recycling vehicles, 43%, and motorists, 27%. The other sources, unsecured vehicles, vehicle debris, construction debris, account for another 30%, so not a trivial amount there. The largest components are plastic debris at 17% and paper items at 11%. And then approximately, again, across all of the sites, 34% of the highway litter items are technically recyclable. Well, that is a summary, a little bit of a lightning round, but we have obviously an hour set aside for this, and the team is happy to take any questions from the audience.
I just had a thought, maybe not so much as a question. When I saw the comment from Region 4 regarding retreads, I somehow wondered if that was somehow tied to the increase in speed limit that we did a few years ago, if there's actually a correlation. I don't know whether that's just a random thought and has any value, but it seems logical.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, I don't remember that coming up when we talked to the Region 4 people, and I'm just going to ask Troy, do you remember that coming up when you were down there?
In speaking with Josh, the UDOT employee down there, he did mention speed is possibly a factor, but his gut instinct was more because they saw more in the summer that St. George is very hot and the hot roads, which could be contributed to by or affected by speed as well, but it was the heat that they suspected caused the retread to pull off more.
Well, and when you're traveling at a faster speed, especially up to 80 miles an hour, then you've got more friction, more heat. So perfectly reasonable to suspect a correlation between the two.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Bob, as you indicated, trash and recycling vehicles, contribute highest percentage. Have you thought about these vehicles? Is there something particular about their shape that makes them more likely to emit trash, or is it user drivers? Can the driver do anything? What did you think about that type of vehicle?
Yeah, it's a good question. I did not spend a lot of time looking at that, as I kind of felt that might have been a good thing to research on the heels of this work. I will, maybe Steve, do you have any experience in your work that would help address Cameron's question?
Absolutely. We've followed trash trucks for, off and on in different times and different situations, and noticed that there always seem to be some items that are not contained as well as one might hope they would be. And when you're driving at a high speed and you hit a bump, perhaps, or you have some other contributing factor, intervening factor contribute rather, then it's expected that something like that would happen. We did a study one time of residential setouts, for example, and on the face of it, it was a time and motion study, but we were really looking at seeing how they were handling spilled items. 50% of the setouts collection resulted in spillage, and only about half of those were cleaned up by the people. Now, that's in a residential area. That's not the same as along highways, but it does let you know that there are issues, and time and motion becomes prohibitive in their world for them to handle it better than that. Not that I agree with that assessment, but I just recognize that assessment is in play. you can hold their feet to the fire, but nobody seems to be willing to do so at this point because it would reduce the amount of productivity significantly. And along with that reduction in productivity would come along a much higher collection cost, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's helpful, Steve. Another anecdote from the interview with Region 3, they said that at exit 278, which was one of the places that we surveyed, and I showed a map of that. Let me see if I can bring that up. Hold on, sorry, hold on. Yeah, this one. They said that right around here, there were what he referred to as domed structures. So where there is horizontal curvature in the pavement, it causes traffic to bounce. And he said that was a source. The fact that there was a jostling of the vehicles as they went over these domed structures was a place where trash was shaken loose from vehicles.
Just to point to that, I think he was probably talking mostly northbound, but we have a project that's coming out this summer to fix those. It's 2 sets of bridges where the camber didn't come out when they poured the deck, so it's got a hump in it. We're fixing those this summer, so if you wanted to do a follow-up, you could see if that was part of the cause.
Good. Thanks for that clarification. Yeah,
That's precisely right. It was the northbound direction there, so you got that one right.
I believe what he's saying. We've bounced a couple of trailers off their hitch. So.
Wow.
There was another anecdote from one of the station managers where trash collection vehicles, when leaving the landfills, were losing trash. Observe them losing trash out of their vehicles, which you would expect them not to have anything, but some of that compacted trash doesn't get fully dumped out, and the gates or whatever contains them are open still.
Yeah, they're supposed to stop and clean it off, but I think they just lower the hatch back down and take off. So
we've seen that before as well in a landfill from in Pennsylvania, that vehicles were having that, or the situation was like that they would clean it out, but felt like they couldn't clean it out completely, and whatever they didn't completely clean out, became a problem.
Bob and Steve, do you want to address David's question in the chat box?
Could you read it, Vincent?
Okay. This study was initiated shortly after the September 2020 windstorm in Utah. Is there any connection between the volume or location of letter survey in this study and the windstorm, maybe extra fighting debris?
Yeah, interesting. The windstorm specifically did not come up in any of our conversations with UDOT folks, but the impact of wind and kind of the physics of wind adjacent to structures such as sound walls did come up. And, I don't know anyone who's really studied this. It's kind of a study of turbulent flow, but where you have a focusing of wind currents and then a sudden drop in pressure that might occur when a structure ends, that would then release any trash that was in the wind stream. That issue came up in our conversations multiple times, and I thought it was notable to bring to the attention in this presentation. There was one of the hotspots in Region 1 which I'm going from memory here. It was the near the interchange of 80 Interstate 84 with I-15. I'm going from memory.
No, Interstate 84 and US 89 at the mouth of Weber Canyon.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Troy. And you remember that, right? Do you want to describe what was described to us as being the issue there?
Yeah. The issue was the canyon winds coming down Weber Canyon across US 89. They're usually pretty heavy, especially in the morning hours. The station manager there actually recommended we didn't survey that site for certain safety issues. Wind was one of them, but he did have a lot to say about the wind causing problems. It was accumulating there, but if you're familiar with that site, there's also two very large gravel mines in that location, and a lot of the litter would end up accumulating on that property of the gravel mines. But it was a real issue that they had there.
I can chime in a little bit on that. When we conducted the 2013 Texas statewide litter survey, we definitely ran into an issue with winds. And if you see me looking up, I'm just looking at my big screen and reading off of that. I'm not looking away. And to the extent that we ended up talking to the weather people, the National Weather Office in that area, and we got all the wind gusts that were seen when we were around the time we were serving, and we were able to determine that there were correlations. I guess that seems clear that it would be, but there's definitely a relationship between those, and I can see from what's been written about this that was a pretty significant windstorm. So it's not hard to imagine that this had a notable effect on litter. The gusts were up to 100 miles an hour, it seems like.
Yeah. You know, on the location of the landfill there on State Route 193, that might, it's a travel route for half of Weber County to go out to the landfill. So.
Yeah.
Right. So when trash vehicles are going around doing what they do, they're set for nominal situations, and in normal circumstances, perhaps none of this occurs. But when there are issues in the road, or when there are very high winds and such, that's when these things can have a visceral effect on how much litter is out there. And depending on how often and to what extent these things occur, then I don't think that they're really prepared to deal with those effectively.
And Danny also posed another question. Bob, do you see that, or you want me to read it to you?
Let me see. Did the study evaluate a correlation between segments that are under contract for Adopt a Highway or sponsored in areas that are not? We did not do that. And let me just, I don't recall seeing any Adopt a Highway signs in the areas that we studied, but Troy, do you recall that?
Yeah, we did not notice. They were pretty short segments that we extrapolated from. In relation to that, though, there sound like there were a lot of services outside of Adopt a Highway programs that they utilized that were unavailable due to COVID situation. I think that was related to using incarcerated persons for trash cleanup, and a lot of the station managers mentioned that they were running behind because they didn't have that resource available at this time.
Yeah, I think that's a statewide phenomenon. We don't adopt out the freeway. We do the one that Danny referred to as sponsored. So we get corporate sponsors, and there's a company that comes and does it. But we don't put youth groups or anything out on the freeway for safety reasons. So.
Right, and that's the other point. So for interstates and for high volume state highways, from the ones in fact, all sites except the first two, I could see where it would not be particularly safe for groups to collect. And even if there were some adopted areas near the sites that were surveyed, two things that are helpful to keep in mind is, one, that these were hotspots, and second, that the sample size to determine that type of correlation, the sample size is very small. So unless it was all or none, it would be difficult to glean anything from that, really.
There are two more questions in the chat box, one from Elizabeth and also David.
Yeah, from Elizabeth, if you had to communicate just one message to waste and recycling companies that would improve the situation, what would it be?
Secure your load, please.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, well, I would add this, simply that the study was done and it seems to point pretty directly to that being a number one source. And it's obviously nothing to be proud of. I would think before communicating that, we'd like to know a little bit more about what the actual mechanism is. How is it that trash falls out of these vehicles, and how much of that is controllable? And I imagine that that's something that we could figure out pretty quickly. And once we did, I think communicating with that group that a pretty comprehensive study was done. It seems to point to these vehicles and this as a main culprit in highway litter, and what can we do to fix this? I can see
I can hear you.
You're muted.
I just said that's helpful, and the follow-up would be really valuable. So thank you.
Robert, just a thought. The ones that are hauling the dumpsters, I mean, you think the state law now says you have to cover your load, and the way they've done that is just a roll-out tarp, which leaves the sides unsecured, and so stuff, they're zipping down the freeway at 70 miles an hour, stuff just coming out the sides. So a tarping where it comes down the side of the container might be helpful.
Okay, good. Thanks, Brian.
We've seen hauling vehicles where the same situation is true on the top. There'll be a tarp, but it won't be directly closing off the load. There'll be a couple of inches of space where things can fly out, and where they can, all you need is a causation, and there it goes. We actually, in the original KAB study, we were doing a pilot drive around, and we actually saw at that time bags and such all over the road, and trying to figure out what was what. And people were saying, well, people are throwing away their grocery bags. It's like, well, that doesn't really make sense, because then how are you going to take your groceries inside? So we kept following, and sure enough, we found a truck that had a tarp on top, but it was not tight to the top of the truck. So things were flying out, and so that's an issue. And we've seen that. That was in Maryland. We've also seen that in Honolulu and other places, but the same circumstances are true everywhere. That haulers tend to use the same types of large trucks to collect in and to tarp, and the tarps are not always effective.
And David has a question for anyone. What's the best way to report and clean up significant litter piles deliberately placed illegally in city, county, or state rights of way, including those somewhat hidden in freeway interchange areas? Actually, Troy, I recall, I'm going to put you on the spot again. In Region 4, they showed you one area that did seem to have a lot of deliberately pitched, garbage bags. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and it might have pertained more towards tires than garbage bags, but they did have both in that area. But oftentimes truck drivers would pull over to replace a tire, and it was quite costly to dispose of the tires, like a full tire from a diesel. So they actually had video footage, or someone related to the station had video footage of truck drivers replacing their tires and just abandoning tires on the side of an exit ramp. And that was a real problem. They reported it cost, I think it was around $70 per tire to dispose of. And because the drivers were leaving them, they ended up having to collect and dispose of those tires. And apparently the stations pay that fee as well.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Click and fix.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Vincent, I got one real quick. This is Danny. I just had a quick
Go ahead,
question.
Danny.
What are other states doing right now for programs or other things that they're being able to initiate that's having success in other states that we could learn from?
Steve, any insights there?
I would have to think about that a little bit because every state is a bit unique. The urban, rural breakdown, the density of population, the culture. Certainly, Utah has a unique culture. Certain states in the South or Northeast have very specific cultures. So it's important to keep all those things in mind and not try and pattern something over a generic plan. I think a plan that would be useful for Utah, it would be important to take the specifics that we all found to be true there into consideration, and then look and see what elements from other programs might assist in putting together a program that's very Utah centric and Utah focused. That's my thoughts on it.
Steve, I am going to follow up with you on this question. I know you have a very similar study going on for Ohio DOT right now. And can you tell us, 2 or 3 bullets about anything that's coming from that is either similar or differentiates what's going on there from what we've seen in Utah?
I can tell you a couple things. One is we did complete that study approximately a year ago. And the other thing I was told is that no one is to say a word about it until that is actually set out, or that we would, not want to wake up and look in our beds and see what's there the next morning. So with that in mind, again, I would defer to the previous point. It's really easy to want to compare yourself to other states. And I'm hopeful that once Ohio's results are done and we're doing similar work in Minnesota, when all these things come out and we have the ability to talk about them, that we will be able to do some comparisons and determine what things are really apply to Utah and what things might not.
All right, thanks. I won't put you on the spot anymore.
No, put me on the spot. I'm glad to. I'll just tell you whatever there is to tell. We talk about Texas, they don't mind. As a matter of fact, Texas might be something to look at. The last two that we've done there were very interesting, and if you want, I'd be glad to make those available. The reason I say that is twofold. Is one, similar to Utah, they have some very densely populated areas, but they also have some desert-like, not desert-like, but you know what I mean. Something like that, areas. And they also occasionally deal with high winds, as again, I mentioned from our 2013 survey. So I'll send those to links to those to Bob, and he can share them with all of you, and you can look at them. That I do think would be of some value, and you folks may want to review those and see what you make of that.
Thank you, Steve, and that will be wonderful. And send it to Bob, and then maybe Bob and I can share to the people.
Sure.
Share to the UDOT folks.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay, if not, thank you, Bob and Steve and everyone here to make this project a quick turnaround and a good, very informative report here. And hopefully that could help us, UDOT, to make a good decision from the report here. So thank you again, and we'll see you guys later.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Hey, Steve, nice job. And Troy, good job. Sorry to put you on the spot, but you guys, it was good color commentary, I thought.
No, that's good. It's good. There's no on the spot. It's important for us to defend whatever was in the report, and if the defense is we can't talk about certain things because other people don't want us to, that's the way that goes. But no, I not only don't mind being put on the spot, I get concerned sometimes if we're not put on the spot, because it suggests that people may not be so fully engaged. But I thought the fact that everybody was asking questions was really a great thing.
Yeah, good. Great. Well, I think people seem pretty happy. That meeting had Lisa Wilson in it. I probably should have acknowledged her, but she's a new deputy director. So she's like, second or third in charge at UDOT. So it's kind of fallen under her category. She didn't say anything. I think she's just informing herself, but I think it's good. It's good exposure.
Yeah, and I think one thing to keep in mind, we talked about it and all, but when people look at our overall pie chart and they see only 1% due to pedestrians, I think it's important to keep reminding them something that we actually did say here, that only 2 sites would have had real accessibility to pedestrians in any real way. So, if more of them had, then pedestrian would have come up more often. I want somebody to take the wrong message that pedestrians are not a big problem. Pedestrians are not a big problem on interstates and high volume state roads. You got company.
Solicitor, Troy.
I'm actually at my mom's today, and it's her clock, her grandfather clock. Yeah, she was getting her second dose of the COVID vaccine today, and was concerned about being sick, so I come over just to be with her to make sure.
Oh, good man. Good man.
You are
To
good.
the presentation though, Bob, I think went really well, and with the questions, if people really wanted to dive into that larger report, I think it gave them good guidance for what they would get in there and help answer some questions.
Good.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. No, not too much was said about recyclables, that if you really tightened up recycling, you could cut litter by about a third, but that's a theoretical construct.
Yeah, no one really seized on that, but you never know. I mean, they're going to meet on this and put together. Elizabeth is part of the PR group at UDOT. Elizabeth Wade, he asked the question, if there was one message, what would it be?
Right.
And, I do think the good news is that group, the people who haul trash, it's pretty defined. And they're probably regulated. You could probably get a list. You could probably campaign them somehow.
Yeah, and here's the thing that comes to mind, and that we've seen is what is about the political will to enforce. In other words, so in the community or wherever, whether it's statewide or local, whatever, what is the real will to have some enforcement mechanism out there? Now, there probably are things on the books. So then the next thing is, does anybody really want to do that? Does a state trooper want to pull over a guy and say, you're not properly secured? And say, you're pulling me over for that? And it's like, well, yeah, the sheriff did that in the movie No Country for Old Men, so I can do it to you here, but those guys don't.
Did that really happen in that movie?
It did. I cannot note. I can't not notice something like that. I have to make this little note.
And did someone die as a result of that? It seems like that probably happened.
That was a very violent movie, so someone probably did die.
I'd be careful about making a direct correlation that the movie, clearly draws, but it's not hard to imagine that there are correlations, because Seattle Washington State rather has a law in place that is solely because a piece of debris fell off a vehicle and hit this woman in the face and disfigured her permanently, and she's blind now permanently because of that.
I personally had a near-death experience with an unsecured load. So yeah,
what
could relate. Oh, it was years ago, but someone lost an aluminum ladder, one of those 30-foot collapsible ladders, right in front of me, and it ended up underneath my car, and I was unable to steer my car on a freeway, 60, 70 miles an hour.
Sure.
And it steered me off the road into the ditch.
Oh my God.
Because it was wedged under my car. But yeah, that was years ago, but it happened.
Let me guess. They did not come back to get their ladder.
Actually, it was kind of interesting. They pulled over. I don't think they realized it had affected me, but they had pulled over about, a couple hundred yards down the road. It was like a typical van, like a work van. But a highway patrolman pulled over behind me, and I had already gotten out and was angry. We were able to pull the ladder out and was like throwing it further off the road. And the highway patrolman at first was concerned about my behavior until he figured out what happened, and then he left and went and tracked down the other person. But yeah, it was quite an ordeal. I skated on a ladder for I don't know how far. It was probably 200 or 300 yards.
Wow.
As I couldn't decelerate because my tires weren't connected to the road at that point. So,
right. And there you go.
I was just skating on a ladder. But yeah, it has real world consequences for sure.
It does. And when it doesn't, people always go, well, the equivalent of well, I was drinking and I drove and nothing happened, so
Yeah.
it must not be a big deal. I can do it again. But every time you do something like that, it's similar to the unsecured loans. You've got a risk.
Yep.
Or the risk. So, but I wonder what I think the key would be the will to enforce. Do the state troopers get to the point where they say, we're tired of this, and yeah, we would support an effort like that. So that's why the environmental court concept, which I know is not in play here, but still just as something to keep in mind, there have been places where that concept has come up and where perhaps troopers and other officers have said, look, for what I'm doing, or even code enforcement, I'm dealing with murderers, rapists, whatever. This is not a priority for me, but for people who understand that there can be a correlation between these type of situations and real world consequences and as such, then, you can streamline that process and you can have some buy-in.
Mhm.
But if you don't have buy-in from people on the who have their feet on the ground, then where are you?
I think a really interesting follow-up study to this would be if you really wanted to change policy. I hate to say it, but money matters more than safety in a lot of ways to politicians or the people that affect policy. And if you could quantify like the amount of money put into not just litter cleanup and collection and disposal, but accidents from litter and the quantifiable amount from litter on the roads, I think someone's probably done it, but
we've done stuff like that.
Yeah. But
I mean, the reason this study got going is that the state legislature in Utah is taking it on, and I think it's going to go straight to them to inform them what to do. Some legislators got it, in their heads that this is a real problem for Utah, trying to develop or, personifying an outdoorsy culture. And yet there's all this trash on the highway. It's unsightly. It doesn't mesh well with the image we're trying to portray. What can we do about it? And it's happening at the same time that there's been a 10% across the board cut for all of the regions, which includes litter pickup.
Yeah.
So trying to see if there's more effective ways of combating the problem.
Yeah, and at a time, we found that this is difficult to make the case in various states to say litter is a disamenity to property values, to tourism, to business development. And in fact, I'm working on exactly this in Minnesota right now. So, you've got tourism industry and such. And yes, you've got budget cuts, but if you don't attack this issue, then when people are making decisions, somewhere along the line, there's a matrix that people, each person that travels and is a tourist has in their own head. There's a matrix that businesses have when they try and figure out where to develop next. When people want to, take a vacation, we're not always privy to all that, but we do know that somewhere along the line, litter and how the roads look is on there. It's in that matrix somewhere, and somewhere along the line, there's a tipping point, and someone will say, let's forget that. Let's go to, and then fill in the blank, Colorado, wherever else. Utah's competing, just like Minnesota is competing with Michigan for certain, and to a lesser extent, perhaps Wisconsin. So, it's important to look at it that way. Okay, if you're having trouble with budgets, what do you want to do? What you want to raise revenues? How do you raise revenues? Well, if you're not taxing your own people, how about bringing in tourist revenues? Tourist revenues are huge. They're in the billions of dollars for various states. So looking at how and Texas deals with this by tying their litter reduction program to their tourist division. It's under tourism,
Interesting. Huh.
right? So so there's definitely a connection, a correlation there that they're aware of, and to the extent that states can sort of get to the aha moment or the that's interesting moment, and say, okay, to the extent we can we do this, it will pay us back in more tourism. Then you've got something, and I will leave it there. But we study that, and so we see a lot of that. It's just hard to get people to see the light sometimes, but the legislature's in on it. That's us.
and I'll be in touch with you guys if there's follow on. These things that it's going to gestate a little bit. The legislature is in session now. I'm imagining that this is going to be brought to their attention, and I suspect there are a number of follow-on studies that we could do, and I think let's just be prepared, and I'll be in touch if there's something like that brewing. Okay.
Excellent. Thanks.
Sounds great. Sounds great. I really liked working with you guys. This was, I know I said it before, it was really fun, and it was interesting.
Yeah.
Good. It was. It's great.
It was great having you on.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it.
We had a dream team.
There you go.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Take care, guys.
Take care, Steve. Bye now.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye.